All right, strap in everyone. We're about to take a deep dive into the ancient Greek underworld. But we're not just going to look at the pictures, we're going deeper, trying to understand how the ancient Greeks really felt about death and what that tells us about how they lived their lives. Our guides for this journey are excerpts from GreekMythology.com and the Greek Mythology Link website. So let's jump right in.
It's a fascinating trip, actually, because the underworld wasn't always, all fire and brimstone.
Mm.
Early on, the Greeks saw death as kind of neutral, just a shadowy existence. Not exactly paradise, but not exactly punishment either.
So like a cosmic waiting room, kind of. Makes you wonder, right? If the reward for a virtuous life is basically the same as doing nothing special, well, maybe virtue isn't all it's fracked up to be.
You got it. And some of those early Greek philosophers, they actually argued for that. That neutral afterlife, I mean. They saw it as a kind of release. Finally, no more striving, no more earthly burdens, just pure existence.
Yeah. That's a perspective I hadn't really thought about before. But later on, things got a bit more organized, right? You've got Tartarus, the Elysian fields. That sounds a lot more like the classic reward and punishment system.
It does, and it reflects how their thinking evolved over time. They started to see the underworld as a mirror of their own society, with laws, judges, consequences. GreekMythology.com even describes Tartarus as being as far beneath Hades as heaven is above earth.
Wow. So not only are you in this terrible place, but you're as far away from anything good as you can possibly be.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have those famous residents of Tartarus, Sisyphus pushing that boulder uphill forever, Tantalus always reaching for food and water just out of reach. It wasn't just about suffering, it was specific torment tailored to the crime.
Like cosmic justice, huh? But where did most people end up? I mean, not everyone was a hero or a villain, right?
That's where the asphodel meadows come in. Both sources describe it as this sort of neutral zone for ordinary souls. Not great, not terrible.
Makes sense. The default setting, I guess. But what about the really good folks? The heroes, the truly virtuous? Tell me about the Elysian fields.
Ah, now we're talking. Paradise, pure and simple. Respite from all those earthly woes. GreekMythology.com even says it was ruled by Rhadamanthus. And maybe even Cronus himself.
Hold on, Cronus, the guy who ate his own children. He's in charge of paradise.
Well, like I said, things aren't always black and white in Greek mythology, but the Elysian fields, they represent that ultimate ideal, sunlight, meadows, peace, the
Yeah.
ultimate reward.
Okay, yeah. I'm seeing how their view of the afterlife really did mirror their view of life itself.
Exactly, a cosmic balancing act.
And it shows in the different regions of the underworld, too. GreekMythology.com talks about the Fields of Mourning, this hauntingly beautiful place for those who died of a broken heart. And what's interesting is that Virgil, in the Aeneid, he mostly mentions women being there.
Right, it adds this whole layer of gender dynamics, even in the afterlife.
It really does.
The Greeks weren't afraid to show how those societal norms played out, even in their vision of the underworld.
This is giving me so much to think about. Different regions, cosmic justice. It's fascinating. But how did a soul actually get to the underworld? What was that journey like?
Well, it wasn't like you could just, walk in. The Greeks had a whole system, a process for this final journey. And it all started with someone very important.
Hermes,
Yeah.
messenger god, with the wing sandals and all that. So he's like the underworld Uber driver.
Pretty much. He's called the psychopomp, which is, well, it's Greek for soul guide, the ultimate travel agent for the afterlife, you could say. But even before Hermes got involved, the living had a big part to play, actually.
Oh, you mean the burial rituals, right. Both sources really emphasize how crucial those were to the Greeks. It wasn't just saying goodbye. It was about making sure the soul actually got where it needed to go.
Exactly. It really shows how closely life and death were connected in their culture. Those rituals weren't just for the living to grieve. They were believed to directly impact the soul's fate.
Okay, so tell me more about these rituals. What do they actually do?
Both GreekMythology.com and the Greek Mythology Link website, they go into a lot of detail on this. Picture it. The body is washed, anointed with oils, dressed in fine clothes. And then, this is the part that always gets me, they placed a coin, an obol, on the deceased's eyes or sometimes on their tongue.
Wait, the obol, that's the ferryman's fee, isn't it? So they literally gave them pocket money for the underworld.
That's right. It was payment for Charon, the ferryman who rows souls across the River Styx. It's such a, I don't know, a specific detail, It makes the whole journey feel so much more real.
I've always wondered about that, actually. Like, what if someone couldn't afford the fee? Were they just stuck on the wrong side of the river?
That's a great question. And the sources, well, they kind of disagree on that one. Some say those who couldn't pay, they wandered the banks of the Styx for 100 years. Others say they just, well, they couldn't cross. Either way, it shows how important those rituals were to ensure a, let's say, smooth transition.
Okay, so you've got the obol, the body's prepped. What happens next?
Then, the body was laid out in state. Family and friends could come pay their respects. Imagine lamentations being sung, offerings of food and drink laid out. It was a community event, really. Everyone coming together to honor the dead.
It sounds almost like a celebration of life. As much as a mourning of death, I mean.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And then the procession to the burial site. Sometimes a family tomb, sometimes a designated graveyard. The body was either buried or cremated. It depended on local custom.
So this whole elaborate process, it wasn't just about, disposing of a body. It was about sending the soul off properly.
Precisely. But not all Greek thinkers agreed on what that sending off actually meant, or even where the soul was headed. We talked about how their view of the afterlife evolved, right? And that's reflected in their philosophy, too. The Greek Mythology Link website, it goes into some really fascinating detail about this.
Oh, yeah, the different philosophical schools of thought. We touched on Plato and his idea of reincarnation, but there were other perspectives too, right? Like the Stoics.
Yes. The Stoics, they were all about living in accordance with nature, accepting your fate, that sort of thing. And their view of the afterlife, well, it was no different. They believed in this logos, this divine reason that basically permeated the universe.
So not a separate heaven and hell, but something more, all-encompassing.
Exactly. Think of it like, I don't know, a cosmic fire.
Mhm.
The soul, to them, was like a spark from that fire. At death, that spark would either rejoin the larger flame, or if it was especially bright, especially virtuous, maybe it would persist for a while on its own, before eventually fading.
So it's not about eternal reward or punishment, but about returning to the source, in a way.
Exactly. Kind of a comforting thought, isn't it? That even in death, we're all part of something bigger, something that connects us all.
It is, yeah.
Mm.
But what about those who thought death was just the end?
Ah, you're talking about the Epicureans. They were materialists through and through. They believed the soul was made of atoms, just like the body. And at death, well, everything just dispersed. No afterlife, no heaven, no hell.
Wow. So the Greeks were having these existential debates centuries ago.
They were, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because those debates are still going on today. We're still trying to figure out what happens after we die, what it all means. But even the Epicureans, the ones who believed in the finality of death, they still focused on living a good life here and now.
So regardless of what they believed about the afterlife, they were still concerned with making the most of this life.
Precisely. But there's one detail about the underworld that both sources mention, and I always find it really poignant. They talk about those who were unburied.
Oh, right. They couldn't cross the River Styx without the proper burial rites, so
Yeah.
they were just trapped.
They were, yeah, stuck between worlds, unable to find peace. It shows just how important those rituals were to the Greeks, not just symbolically, but for the soul's actual fate.
And what about those who were wrongly condemned? What happened to them?
They, along with those who died by suicide, they also ended up in this in-between space. GreekMythology.com calls it limbo. This waiting area for souls whose fate was uncertain, unresolved.
Even in the underworld, there's bureaucracy, huh?
It seems so. And then there's this one region that both sources describe. I find it fascinating. The Veil of Mourning. It was specifically for those who died of heartbreak.
Wow, that's incredibly specific.
It is, and it adds another layer to how the Greeks viewed the afterlife, That even in death, those powerful emotions of love and loss, they still lingered.
It's a reminder that the underworld wasn't just about, abstract concepts like justice or reward. It was about human emotions.
Yeah.
About the things we carry with us even after we're gone.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What stories did those souls in the Veil of Mourning have to tell? What loves had they lost? What tragedies had unfolded?
My mind is officially blown. We went from this neutral, shadowy realm to this complex system of regions, judges, rituals, philosophical debates. I'm starting to think the Greek underworld is less of a place and more like a reflection of their entire worldview. It's crazy how much we've learned just by looking at their underworld. It's like this one idea, it branches out, and it touches on everything the Greeks cared about. Justice, fate, love, loss, you name it, it's all there.
It really is. The underworld, it wasn't just a playground for gods and monsters, It was a way for them to make sense of the world, their values, their fears.
And it's not just ancient history. These ideas, these stories, they're still with us. I mean, how often do you hear someone say, crossing the River Styx? As a metaphor for dying, I mean.
All the time. And think about all the books and movies, right? They use that imagery of heaven and hell, which, let's be honest, got a lot of inspiration from the Greek underworld. Dante's Inferno. Total shout out to those ancient stories.
Totally. It's like those myths, they planted seeds in our minds.
Yeah.
They just keep growing.
That's the power of a good story, right? Gives us a way to think about the big stuff, even death. And the Greeks, oh, they were masters at weaving those stories in a way that still gets to us, even thousands of years later.
Speaking of stories, we talked about Plato's myth of and reincarnation, that idea of souls choosing their next life, drinking from the river Lethe to forget everything. Man, it's wild.
It is, isn't it? And it stuck with people. The whole idea of karma, past lives, we're still debating that stuff today. And Plato, he wasn't just telling a cool story either. He was asking us to think,
Yeah.
about the choices we make, the kind of life we want to live. Because in the myth of our choices matter, even after we die.
So it's not just about being good to get into Elysium. It's about making choices that, shape who you become.
Exactly. And that brings us back to that idea of justice, right? That whole thing that runs through the underworld, the judges, the punishments. It all points to this belief that actions have consequences, that there's a kind of cosmic accountability.
Right. Like even if you get away with something in this life, you'll have to face the music eventually.
It's a powerful idea, yeah. And it's found its way into so many religions and beliefs, whether it's karma, divine judgment, whatever. That concept of facing the consequences for our actions, it's a pretty universal theme when you think about it.
So the Greeks weren't just, making up stories. They were trying to understand these huge questions.
Yeah.
Life, death, what it all means.
And those questions, they're still relevant to us today. We're still drawn to those same mysteries. What happens when we die? Is there some kind of judgment? Do we get another chance? The Greeks, they didn't have all the answers, but they gave some amazing stories to help us think about it.
This whole deep dive, it's been like a journey, not just through the underworld, but through our own minds, our own beliefs about life and death. We talked about rivers of fire, three-headed dogs, eternal paradise, even the idea of choosing our own destiny.
It's been quite a ride, and it just shows how the Greek underworld, this dark, mysterious place, it's actually a reflection of us, our hopes, our fears, our desire to understand what comes next.
I think that's a perfect way to put it. Next time I hear someone talk about crossing the River Styx or see heaven and hell in a movie or something, I'm going to remember the ancient Greeks and their stories. Because those stories, they're still shaping how we think about things, even today.
And who knows, maybe we will all face those judges someday. So it's
Yeah.
probably a good idea to, live a good life, just in case.
You got that right.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think I'm going to go do something nice for someone, just to be on the safe side. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the Greek underworld. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.